Let's go ahead and jump into Beowulf and we'll get into the battle with Grendel because that's where it gets kind of funky. And it starts off, it shows so many of the elements we saw in The Wanderer, and so many of the elements that you understand now with Old English culture come up in this poem. This again was recorded, it was written down around 1000, but it has roots apparently, and I can't emphasize enough. It's apparently we don't know for sure about where this poem came from and all those kind of things. It is set primarily in Denmark, but Beowulf himself is from Sweden, and the poem itself originates in England. Okay, that's a bit of an issue. It's a little complicated, but I do want you to remember that all those people were all essentially cousins of each other. The Swedes, the Danes, the Geats, the British tribes, they all had connections to each other. And so this was part of their shared history. Okay. And so let's go ahead and jump in and I'll go through this as best I can, but I can't emphasize enough that so much of this we're a little bit uncertain about. Quite we don't quite know. What I don't want you to do is confuse this with the kind of culture that has large castles and moats and everything else. I want to emphasize about J.R.R. Tolkien really was one of the innovators with, addressing Beowulf from a scholarly perspective. And you will see elements of Beowulf in the Lord of the Rings trilogies. You will see that they don't necessarily live in castles and knights of the round. It's not all that. It's a lot of modest buildings, but an enormous amount of threats around them. That's essentially based in Tolkien's studies of Old English. So let's go ahead and jump in. But for your imagination, for how you figure this, think more of Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy and less of the castles and all those other things. And let's shrink myself up. Works every time. And let's go through this. I should mention Seamus Heaney is the translator of this, and there's a number of translations out already. This one's excellent. I think it's the best. He's a poet from Northern Ireland, and he's absolutely magnificent. He catches so much of the music and the really what's compelling about the poem and brings it into contemporary society. And now let's jump in. This is right from the start. It says Shield Shefson, a wrecker of mead benches, rampaging among foes. This terror of all troops had come far. A foundling. In other words, he was abandoned. Boy, rough start. To start with, he would flourish later on as his powers waxed and his worth proved. He's doing, yeah, he's making a go at it. As his powers waxed and his worth was proved in each of the clan on the outlying coast, beyond the whale road, that's going to be the ocean. He had to yield to him, had to yield to him, and began to pay tribute. What a jerk, huh? Man, this guy is a terror. No, that was a good king. This definition of what's good, notice what it is. It's not a wise old man sitting on his throne pronouncing wisdom upon thee. No, it's a guy it doesn't matter who's his daddy. It doesn't matter at all. It matters what he did, okay? And he went out and conquered other peoples. He did not share wisdom. He was not wise. He was a man of action entirely. That seems to be an old English element. That seems to be a value of the old English culture. You would recognize this maybe a little bit in Game of Thrones, sorta, which is sorta, kinda based on this, but be aware of it, for how you think this through of The Hobbit and how he figures things. Notice the value system that's being promoted here. It's not going to line up with many other passages. you're not going to get a consistent perspective theologically or historically throughout this poem. It strikes me as being a juxtaposition of different elements throughout. That's why I think there's what would be called interpolation. In other words, putting different things in there somewhat forcefully, but somewhat respectively for the original so that it doesn't quite fit. Trying to make it fit, but that it doesn't. That's what I think. But I'll tell you very clearly, I can't prove it. I can't. So I just see it as being a juxtaposition of different cultures and different elements. Um, could it have been one poet? Yeah, could have. Let's go ahead and we'll pick it up a little bit here. Notice it mentions the Danes. That's where it's based. And it says HROTHGAR. And it says, HROTHGAR, friend and kinsman, flock to his ranks. This is a kind old man. Okay, this is the old wizard from Harry Potter or something like that. Young followers of force that grew to be a mighty army, so his mind turned to hall building. He handed down orders for men to work on a great mead hall, meant to be a wonder of the world forever. This is not building a castle. This is building a mead hall. This is not building a castle for, military means to dominate the local people. That would come after William the Conqueror. And so I really want to emphasize a mead hall is for the thanes who would fight with him. And so he's basically building a hall for his thanes who fight with him. That's that communal spirit that is part of the Old English epic, Old English ethic. And that's what HROTHGAR embodies. That doom abided, but in the time it would come, the killer instinct unleashed among the in-laws, the bloodlust rampant. Then a powerful demon, a prowler through the dark, nursed a hard grievance. It harrowed him to hear the din of the loud banquet. That was weird. What the heck? There's two things in this passage, and this is at just about 80, line 80. We're going to go with lines on this. We don't have page numbers. There's two odd things, and it has that doom abided, but in the time it would come. Doom. That's doom for the mead hall. They're telling us right away that this thing ain't going to last forever. As magnificent as this has got a due date on it. Okay? And then it goes into, then a powerful demon, a prowler through the dark, nursed a hard grievance. And what the heck? Here comes Grendel. Notice it does not name Grendel here the way it named HROTHGAR before it got into HROTHGAR. It gives this kind of mystery to him, and that is something you will see in horror movies. The monster, the evil person, you'll see their feet walking across this sidewalk in the leaves, in the darkness. You won't actually see anything, but you'll hear the knife scrape along here, and it's all suggestive. It's hinting at something. That gives him an ominous presence throughout the poem. In other words, that's not HROTHGAR, that's Grendel. Every day in the hall, the harp began being struck, in clear song of a skilled poet, telling with mastery of man's beginnings, how the Almighty had made the earth, a gleaming plain girdled with waters. Holy cow, that's Genesis right there. And that's an element throughout the poem, is you're going to get a lot of allusions to Genesis and to the Old Testament, but mostly to Genesis. You won't see much, if anything at all, of the New Testament. You'll see the Old Testament throughout. And so you get that here, but notice that what really sets off Grendel is the harp being struck, okay? In other words, the people together. And you also get this picture of the poet, it would have been called a scope, singing out for the people. That is an incredibly important passage because that's one of the only times we hear how their poetry was presented. It wasn't picked up at the bookstore. It was presented to the thanes in the hall with a harp in the back. Basically, it's a song. that they would follow along with. Okay, let's keep going. And Grendel was the name of this grim demon. Now you get the name. Now you get who it is. Now watch this description because it's gonna get weird. The name of the grim demon, haunting the marches, marauding around the heath. And notice that the haunting, the marches, marauding around the heath. You almost can feel the footsteps going through the mud, okay? And the desolate fens he had dwelt for a time, in misery among the banished monsters. Banished? What the heck is that? Okay. Cain's clan. Here we go. Cain's clan, whom the Creator had outlawed and condemned as outcasts. So, hold on. He's part of the clan. What did he do to be outcast? He's part of the clan. So he was outcast because he's a descendant of Cain. He did not do anything wrong to be banished. He did nothing wrong. He was just banished before he could, speak. And so he was banished from the beginning. So much of what Grendel does seems to be motivated by this banishment. And before he could do anything or show himself or prove himself. And it says, for the killing of Abel. He didn't kill Abel. The eternal Lord had exacted a price. Notice the way God here is figured as if he is a warrior himself. He does vengeance. You kill one of mine, I kill one of yours. Okay, what are you going to do about it? Okay, that's what the eternal Lord is here. He is essentially a projection of Old English culture into a heavenly body. It's not the kind of Christianity most people are familiar with from Sunday. This is a very vengeful God. This is a God. This strikes me as essentially an attempt to bring together both the Christian God and the warrior culture. And what they end up with is finding a little common ground in a certain interpretation of Genesis. We don't want to talk about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but Genesis, we can work with that. We can make that go. Okay, that's what you see here. At least that's what I see here. Okay, so he puts him among the ogres and elves, and that's where Tolkien gets his gig. He took over Heorot, haunted the glittering hall of the throne itself. He wasn't able to approach the throne. That's kind of a little voodoo-y. But the almighty judge of good deeds and bad, the Lord God, the head of heavens and high king of the world, this strikes me as being interjected. In other words, somebody put this section in to an otherwise Old English poem that had pagan values. In my reading of it, you will see these chunks together, whole sections plugged in, it seems. That's interjection of text into the original, if it is, which I cannot prove. I've read pieces where people have claimed that it's all one author putting it together. We don't know who it is. The author of the poem is referred to as the Beowulf poet, but what it strikes me as is that there was an oral tradition that was mostly pagan and steeped in the warrior traditions, and it seems that they were converting over to Christianity, and they started bringing in elements of Christianity and stitching them into Beowulf as best they could. Okay, and so no matter. So Beowulf says, I'm going to head out and go, prove myself pretty awesome. When he heard about Grendel, Hygelac's Thane, that's Beowulf, was on home ground over in Geatland. Geatland is in Sweden. Now, keep in mind what we have set up here. Let me blow myself up. What we have set up is Beowulf is in Sweden. This is going to take place down in Denmark. And you can look this up in Google Maps if you're a little bit confused. And this poem itself is from England. There's no mention of England. It takes place in Denmark. And Beowulf comes from Geatland, which is in Sweden. They were all basically cousins of each other. That's what you've got in this, okay? Let me shrink myself up. Oh, I need my dinosaur. Much better. He announces his plan, what he's going to do to Hrothgar. He's basically says, I'm going to go earn a name for myself because, I'm not too well known, too well liked around here. I'm going to go save this Hrothgar guy and show what a tough guy I am. And that's important to keep in mind. He's essentially doing this for himself. So, and what kind of man are you who arrive rigged out for combat in coats of mail? This is the guard at the shore in front of Hrothgar's castle. He's asking him, what are you doing? And Beowulf doesn't really answer in a straightforward manner, but he answers. He said, we belong by birth to the Geat people. We're cousins, and owe our allegiance to Lord Hygelac. In my day, my father was a famous man, noble warrior named Ecgtheow. That's my daddy. Okay. We come in good faith to find your lord in nation's shield, the son of Healfdene. Give us the right to advise and direction. Basically, we've come to give some advice to Hrothgar. We don't really need to do anything. We have some weapons, but don't ask. We're just here to talk. So that's it. Mind you, keep in mind with this, let me blow myself up one more time. That's not really the whole story. It's not that it's dishonest or a lie. It kind of is, but it's not really the whole story. What Beowulf is afraid of, it seems to me that Beowulf is afraid that if he lays out his cards, this guy isn't going to be too happy with him. So, in other words, problem solver, the guy who's Mr. Fix-It, is coming from across the street, and let me show you how to mow your lawn. No, this is how you do it. Give me that mower. Let me show you how to fix this situation with Grendel, which you guys can't handle. We'll fix it for you. And that's what Beowulf is aware of. And that's going to go on. So Beowulf here plays his cards close to his chest and doesn't reveal what he's really about to do. Okay, back to work. We come in good faith to find your Lord and nation's shield. Okay, give us the right and advised direction. So tell us which way do we go? What aisle do we go to find the pickles? And it says, I used to know him, and this is Hrothgar, when he was a young boy. Basically, he's my nephew. Sort of, kind of. Bring him on in. Now I mean to be a match for Grendel. This is where Beowulf starts to play his cards. He starts to say what he's actually going to do to Hrothgar, Uncle Hrothgar, sorta. Settle the outcome in a single combat, and so my request, O King of Bright Danes, dear Prince of the Shieldings, friend of the people, and their ring of defense, my one request, I just got one request, is that you won't refuse me, who have come this far, the privilege of purifying Heorot with my own men to help me, and nobody else. Keep your boys on your side of the street, and I will take care of everything around here. I'm Mr. Fix-It. I'll tell you how to run your show. I will make it all good. Now, keep in mind how the Thanes, Hrothgar's Thanes, would respond to this. Hrothgar is basically letting his nephew mow the lawn, and his boys are sitting right there. There might be a wee bit of resentment if Beowulf thinks he can fix their problem. Maybe. I think there's going to be a lot of that, okay? They don't come out right and say it, but it certainly gets performed. Once again, let's shrink ourselves up. Okay, much better. And Hrethel gave me to Hygelac, fate goes ever as fate must. Notice how fate is mentioned, which it really isn't a Christian value. Fate comes up again and again. It's part of the Old English culture, the Old English warrior culture. From where he crouched at the king's feet, UNFERTH, son of Ecglaf, spoke contrary words. UNFERTH is a relatively minor character. But boy, is he important. Okay, he brings up, he challenges. He's got a number of layers to him. Unferth does. He shows the resentment that is probably common among the Danes. Probably he demonstrates it, and he challenges. Also, he challenges Beowulf. He basically makes Beowulf commit to his words that he'd better follow through on this. This better not just be you talking a big game, okay? So he challenges him publicly, not privately, discreetly. He challenges him publicly, and watch where this goes, okay? Are you the Beowulf who took on Brecca in a swimming match on the open sea, risking the water just to prove you could win? Sassy boy. And sheer vanity made you venture out on a main deep. So you guys were just showing off. Wasn't that you? Well, friend Unferth, you have had your say about Brecca and me, but it was mostly beer that was doing the talking. The truth is this, when the going was heavy in those high waves, I was the strongest swimmer of all. I showed myself. And so Beowulf is full of himself here, but he's standing up for his words. Unferth has made a very reasonable challenge, and Beowulf is having to defend himself and show that this is a legitimate boast. Okay, so the boast is something that is part of medieval poetry, and Unferth brings it out of Beowulf. Many people who read Unferth for the first time think he's just kind of a saucy guy. He is doing a very necessary role in the poem, and that he's speaking for the other Danes whose turf is being stepped on. But he's also publicly challenging Beowulf, who now needs to stand up for himself and make sure he follows through. And let's go to this one. This is around 674, 5, 8, whatever. When it comes to fighting, I count myself as dangerous any day as Grendel. So it won't be a cutting edge I'll wield to mow him down, easily as I might. What? What Beowulf just said is, I don't need no stinking badges. I don't need a sword to cut down Grendel. I'm going to fight him mano a mano, because he doesn't use swords. Keep in mind that Grendel is a monster, and he has a talon, and Beowulf's not going to take a sword. That's something. He's going to fight him fairly. This is clearly a fair battle on paper, but this is something, okay? But keep these rules in mind, how Beowulf goes into this battle where he's defending Heorot. He is defending Heorot from Grendel's aggression against them. But keep in mind also that Grendel is angry because he's been cast out of society and he has no kins. He resents them deeply and murderously for that. There's a lot of nuance to that, okay? It's not so simple of good guys, bad guys. It isn't so simple, especially when you pay careful attention to the words, the phrases, and the clauses of how this is composed. This is extraordinarily detailed and precise artistry here. It really is, okay? Let me shrink myself up. Bang. So he's going to take him on, mano a mano. If face me he dares, and may the divine Lord in his wisdom grant victory to whichever side he sees fit. That again seems to be an interpolation it really seems to be placed in there. That's me though. Okay? Then out of the night came this shadow stalker, stealthy and whatever. He saw many men in the mansion sleeping, a ranked company of kinsmen and warriors quartered together and with glee, and his glee was demonic. So when he sees them together, okay, let me blow myself up one more time. When he sees them together, that makes him demonic because they are sharing the thing that he has been denied, companionship. Grendel has none of that. And he resents it when they have it. And he doesn't go around picking off one guy here, one guy there. He looks when they're together, because that's when he wants to destroy them, because they're enjoying what he cannot have, which is kinship. Okay, let's shrink ourselves down. Now, this gets kind of weird, okay? Before morning, he would rip the life from limp and devour them, feed on their flesh, but his fate that night was due to change. It ain't going to turn out so well. He grabbed and mauled a man on his bench, bit into his bone lappings, bolted down his down his blood, and gorged on him in lumps, leaving the body utterly lifeless. I'll tell you this, just reading that makes it like I'm chewing a hamburger. Okay, it's actually built into the language of this passage and other parts of it. He actually is reflecting what's going on there. He does have this almost chewing motion in these lines where Grendel is eating up Thane after Thane after Thane. But notice the way he does it. Is he really a demon, or is he more of a wild animal? It's not entirely clear in my mind, but he certainly is not simply a demon in his actions. You will get him branded as demonic, as evil, as all this other stuff, but when you watch him actually do things, he seems a lot closer to a wolf, I would say. Shake myself up. He grabbed and mauled, okay, blah, blah. Venturing closer, his talon was raised to attack Beowulf, where he lay in his bed. He was bearing in with an open claw. And mind you, Beowulf's about to get attacked. Keeps his cool. He did not bother to lift a finger to save the other man, okay? So he ate this other guy and bit into all the bones and everything else, but Beowulf didn't try to save him. He was bearing in with an open claw when the alert hero's comeback and arm lock forestalled him utterly. And so Beowulf here grabs him, okay? And let me jump up a little bit here. He says, every bone in his body quailed and coiled, but he would not escape, okay? He was desperate to flee to his den and hide with the devil's litter. Notice how odd that passage is. That's more like a wild animal. That isn't an evil demon come to destroy. They usually don't make horror movies about monsters that want to run away. That seems like a wild animal. And so this is complicating this whole picture of light versus dark. It's just unusual. I'll kind of leave it there, but understand when you actually slow down and read the words and phrases that are in these passages, things get weird, really troubling. This whole approach of dividing the world up into clear good guys and clear bad guys doesn't work with Beowulf, and it really doesn't. Let me go one more time. Fingers were bursting, the monster backtracking, the man overpowered, the dread lands was desperate to escape, to take a roundabout road and flee. You kind of get the picture. Then watch this, okay? Who killed whom? As long as either lived, he was hateful to the other. The monster's whole body was in pain. A tremendous wound appeared on his shoulder. How'd that get there? Who did this? Did Beowulf do it by this? No, doesn't say that. Did Grendel do it to himself? Seems like he did. In other words, Grendel's fear is what is going to kill him. Grendel's fear is. Now, Beowulf is undeniably brave and fearless, and Grendel is undeniably fearful and scared. He seems to kill himself by his own efforts to flee. Sinew split and bone lappings burst. It does not say Beowulf tore his arm off. His arm is being torn off by his own retreat. Beowulf was granted the glory of winning. Grendel was driven under the fen banks, fatally hurt to his desolate lair. Ouch. On more than one level. This is a difficult passage, like so many of the passages in Beowulf, where if you divide everything up in clear black and white, there's all this ambiguity throughout. And the religious elements are all it's not so simple. This is a magnificent epic. This is the original epic of the English language. There wasn't one before this. And this is troubling in that there's all these old English, it seems to be a patchwork, a bit of a quilt, seems to be. But there's all this complexity and subtlety built into it. And so give it your best. And when we get to Grendel's mother, it's going to get worse. It's going to get odd, okay? But keep all these themes in mind as you get to Grendel's mother, and we'll wrap it up. Take care.